Hi, Margot. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you see me okay? Because I don't think
I can't, yeah, I can't see you. Oh, now I can see you. Yep.
Now you can. And I am dead too close. Let's see. I just need to move in the right direction.
All right. Looks like. All right. Dr. Lyles, can you hear me okay? I think you're muted.
Good morning.
Okay, there we go. Perfect. So I think we are just waiting on Dr. Storr.
Thank you, Adrian, for sending me the doc. It just got ate up. I don't know where it's at. What happened?
Margaret, that happens. It's all right.
Okay. And then, of course, I'm here at the office and the printer won't print it. So I have it on my phone. Of course.
That's how that works. Of course.
All right. So like I said, I think we're just waiting, let's see, for one more panelist. So I'm just going to see, it seems like they start coming in as attendees and I have to promote them. So we'll give it a couple minutes. All right. Get this ready. Can you see me? I don't see.
Mercy.
Let me say, I'm wearing red today.
Feel good?
I never, ever wear red. But for this panel, I'm wearing red.
You look great.
Thank you. This is the only red thing. I have two red things. This is one of my red things.
I get it. You look dynamic in blue though, so.
You know that's my color. Hey, Emily.
Good
Hi.
morning, Emily.
Hi.
Emily, well, I've got you. Do we have dates for the next Green Dot training? Someone asked me about that this morning.
Ooh, yes, and they haven't sent us a contract yet. So, yes, but I will feel much more confident as soon as I have a contract.
Mid-May still.
Yep, and I think it's the week of the 15th, 17th, whatever the Tuesday is of that week through the Friday.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great news.
I was going to say, thank you. I like where this is going.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So it looks like we have all of our panelists here. And would everybody mind just like unmuting and just saying like a word or two so I can check to make sure we've got everybody's audio?
Hello, I'm just trying to fix my video. This is Alyssa.
Okay, perfect. And then how about Emily? Could you just like talk real quick so I can make sure everyone's audio is working?
Yes, I can talk real quick.
Okay, perfect. And then Dr. Lyles.
Hey, everyone. Good to see y'all.
Okay, and then
I'm here.
Margot.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. So it sounds like everybody's audio is working great because I can hear you all. And let's see. Make sure.
I'm going to switch to my laptop, so give me just a second.
Okay, let me know if you need me to like let you back in or anything like that. All right, we've got our YouTube stream working. Okay. Let's see. Hopefully. Oh, there we go. Dr. Storr, you're muted.
Oh, hi, Miss Margot. Hi, everybody.
Alyssa.
Hi, Adrian. Hi, Emily. Hi, Anna.
All right.
Hey, Alyssa. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Anna, do you know how the attendance was for the conference yesterday?
I think actually, so Anna, this is Sophie. I'm the director
Oh,
of Health and
Sophie.
Wellness. Yeah, hi everyone. I should have introduced myself as you were coming in. I'm the director of Health and Wellness for student government. So Anna's on the call, but she's not on ISU Student Government's
Got it.
web, so she can't talk. But there she is. In the
There she
chat.
goes.
So I can I'll text her really quick and ask her if she knows. See if she says anything. And we'll just give it one more minute and then we'll get started.
Okay.
So Sophie, you're going to be our moderator?
Yes. So I'll be asking you guys questions and we'll start as soon as it hits 11 so that I can use up as much time as possible. But I just want to give a couple more minutes in case anybody comes into the Zoom. We're also recording live on YouTube as well. So she said that she thinks that they had a few people on YouTube that attended yesterday. So it looked like they had some good attendance. All right, let's see. Okay, perfect. So we are at 11 o'clock. So I want to welcome everybody to our Violence Against Women and Women's Health panel. As I said before, my name is Sophie Young. I'm the Director of Health and Wellness for ISU Student Government. And what I'd like to do is introduce all of our panelists. So what I'm going to do is I'll call the names as I see them on the screen. And then if you can just give a short introduction of yourself, that would be great. So I will start with Margot. You're on the top of my screen right now. So if you wanted to get us started.
Sure. Well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. My name is Margot Foreman. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Diversity, Inclusion, and Equal Opportunity here at Iowa State, as well as the Iowa State Title IX Coordinator.
All right, and then next I see Dr. Lyles on my screen, if you wanted to go next.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adrian Lyles. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I serve as Associate Director of Equal Opportunity and the Senior Deputy Title IX Coordinator. I'm also an Associate Teaching Professor in Philosophy and Religious Studies.
All right, great. Thank you, Dr. Lyles. And then next I see Emily.
Good morning. My name is Emily Miller. My pronouns are she, her. And I am the Health Promotion Coordinator for Green Dot and Sexual Health based in Student Wellness.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. And then last here I have Dr. Storr.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Alyssa Storr. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an assistant teaching professor in the Women's and Gender Studies program here at Iowa State. So thank you for inviting me this morning.
All right, thank you guys. And then if you had noticed on the agenda, we did have one more panelist who wasn't able to make it today. That was Dr. Monica Benkin, and she actually had to appear in front of the legislature. So that's a great opportunity for her, and we're glad to have her representing Ames. But unfortunately, that means that she can't be here today. But obviously, we still have 5 great panelists with lots of questions to ask them. So our first question that we'd like to have each of you answer is, why did you choose the field in which you did? So if we just wanted to go in the same order, I guess, starting with Dr. Margot, that'd be great.
Well, that's an interesting question. I am not completely sure I chose the field that I'm in. I believe my job and career chose me. I would be doing this work probably whether or not I got paid for it in a lot of ways, just because I believe in the tenets that undergird the work: justice and fairness and equity, access, and just pretty general freedom. So that's what I would say, that the job found me.
My answer is very similar. When you asked the question, Sophie, I was like, I didn't choose it, it chose me. So in terms of my work with gender equity, that is what I would be doing anyway. In terms of working around issues of sexual violence, that really started literally with a group of students finding me and kind of starting that journey for me. So yeah, I'd be doing it anyways.
Mhm.
Yeah, the chose is an interesting piece of this question, but I always knew I wanted to go into something with sexual health, and my career started in sex education, and I saw it was really fun to get to talk about all of the sexual health information in classrooms, but I saw lots of gaps that we just didn't have space for in the curriculum, or at least I was told. So things like bystander intervention, looking out for your friends, consent, healthy relationships, things like that were missing. And so I have had this really big passion to be able to bring that to folks again. And now I can kind of fill the gaps that I felt like were missing when I was in the classroom. So I think it was also just a nice falling of the puzzle pieces, probably like Margot and Dr. Lyles, but I've been really lucky.
I think for me, I go along with all of the panelists that it chose me, but I also chose it as well. So I have been in Iowa State for a very long time. I transferred here in 1997. And so I've worn all the different hats on campus that I think you could possibly wear. So a student, a staff member, an administrator, and a faculty member. And so being able to find my passion, which was student success and student activism, really fit well with my PhD in higher ed. So all my degrees are from Iowa State. And so my last one, of course, was my PhD in higher ed. And it really just, I'd be doing this work regardless of whether or not I was at Iowa State. But being in an educational setting such as this has led me down a lot of different journeys that most have been pretty successful, others not so much, but being able to work with students on a variety of issues really has made me realize time and time again that this is where I should be and where I need to be and where I will continue to be. So, I chose it, but it also chose me at the same time. So.
Great. Thank you guys for your thoughtful answers. I'm moving on to the next question. This relates a little more to being a woman in your role. And we wanted to know, have you experienced any struggles specifically as a woman in the role that you're taking on?
Are we in the same order? Okay, so interesting question. So I think that it's hard to detect that. I come to work as a whole person. So I don't come to work in just one identity. So if there's struggle, it's pretty difficult to parse out what the struggle, if it's based on my identity, where it belongs, right? Is it because I'm, a plump size woman? Is it because I'm becoming more aged in the work? Is it because I have a disability? Is it because I'm Black? Is it because I'm female? I can't, that requires me to have to sift through the intent of the action. And so I choose not to. And that's helped in as much as I come into a space feeling very empowered. I give myself permission to be empowered in all of who I am. And so I have a hard time detecting struggle. And I refuse to say that the struggle is about me. The struggle is about probably the messages I'm delivering, folks not being able to handle the truth versus or dealing with their own cognitive dissonance or the issues at hand is not about me. And if it is, I choose not to acknowledge that. So I guess the answer is maybe I've had them, but I can't pinpoint that for you.
I think what Margot's speaking to is very much around intersectionality that I know hopefully we'll get to later on in our conversation. So much of identity, there's like the inside and the outside, right? So my answer to this question is absolutely, and I can pinpoint it as being about gender, sex, identity as woman, because of how people assign identities to me. So based on the identities they've assigned to me, the fields I've been in, and in terms of my role, not in my role right now, roles at Iowa State, but the whole journey for Adrian was in graduate school being sexually assaulted by my faculty advisor. It was being told over and over again that women don't do real philosophy, feminist philosophy isn't real philosophy. It was always being touched and hugged and embraced by men. And I think there's such an interesting conversation happening right now regarding Governor Cuomo and what that looks like. So that was really part of the trajectory as well. Law in that field, it's very much the kind of work that I do isn't real law. It's like women's law. So we think about gender identity and kind of these assignments we have for women because of the identities that are protected upon me. I think for me, I can pinpoint this is discrimination based on sex. This is sexual harassment throughout the entire course of my career.
Thank you for that. I think my answer was no. But that's because my career path has been so focused in the, I'm a teacher or was a teacher, and that is a completely expected space for a woman to exist in. And I worked in sexual health and sexual violence prevention, right? Those are both very female dominated spaces. And so I get to say no, but I also get to say no because I'm a white, cisgender, able-bodied person who doesn't have all these extra barriers placed in front of me. So that question really was an interesting spark for me when I was like, no, I don't think it was, but it might have been both because of the unearned privilege that I have, but also that I was sitting in very expected or accepted spaces.
Wow, that's a really loaded question. So currently I'm being trolled on social media because of the job that I have, along with some other faculty members. And I don't know how that would look if I was a male within the program. And we have had male core faculty, and we also have male affiliated faculty within our program. And so I don't know if the trolling would look the same if I identified as a male. And I think in that respect, my gender plays a part, but gender is socially constructed. And so I can't 100% say, yes, gender played a part in that. I think that it does. When we see how, especially female identified individuals who are talking about issues of justice, inequality, and free speech for that matter, are denigrated if they think a certain way or are on the other side, plays a big part in how we are able to challenge those stereotypes and challenge those falsehoods that are placed against us according to what we teach and how we teach, and how easy it is for people to say that is wrong and try and silence you. But when you try and have a discussion or a conversation or bounce back with a rebuttal, you're seen as being confrontational or challenging. And we all know that as women, depending on what you look like, you're deemed difficult, you're deemed angry. And so I think that gender has played a part in how I am treated as a faculty member, whether it be by colleagues or students or staff or whoever, and also the people that troll me on social media, if they would be trolling me in the same capacity than if I was a male faculty member. So I think gender plays a part in that, but also I have other intersecting identities that may impact that as well.
And if I may, Alyssa, thank you so much for that, because you made me want to take something back. I do take back that it hasn't affected my role, because it does. Because over and over again, the words that I deliver are received differently than they probably received if a man were saying them. And exactly these stereotypes and prejudices and bias and the double bind, I think it's very present in each of the roles I play on campus. So I take that back. Thank you, Alyssa.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for your thoughtful insights about that question. I'd like to move on to the next one if we could. And this question has a little more to do with women's health. So we wanted to know, what do you think, or in your personal opinion, is one of the greatest challenges facing women's health today?
I'm not quite sure that the challenge hasn't been consistent over time. When you think about how women die and have died during childbirth, when you think about how our bodies are kind of already positioned to be exposable and to be set at the pleasure of men or in aid to population growth, and all the ways that we are kind of told how we use our bodies or the value for our bodies, whether or not we have the right over our own reproductive health and what we choose to do with that. That's one piece. But then when we think about the stress of life that is put on our bodies, whether it is in children rearing, family holding up enterprises, the work that we do when we talk about struggle about being a woman. Part of the struggle of being a woman is that I am holding all of this stress and supposed to hold all of these hats, right, that are assigned by gender roles simultaneously. And I'm seeing things happen to the women who are presenting themselves with issues. So it's just day-to-day life, I think, and the way that we have pathways to healthcare that I think are inadequate, especially if you're socially in an economic situation where you don't have access to either transportation, good insurance coverage, providers who care enough to look at you from a standpoint of health and not of your identity. If you have the ability to finance your medications, your vitamins, access to exercise equipment, access to park, access to food, is not just a gender issue there, but because of all the co-founding struggles that we are dealing with, making room for yourself to actually do good preventive health is difficult. And there is, it becomes more compound when you add on different layers of identity. If you're a trans female, where do you get healthcare? There are just all these layers. And so one of the saddest things I've seen, I worked in a facility for long-term care, is that I would see a wife come every day and bring meals for her spouse. And when the spouse died, she died soon after. And it was because she did not take care of her own health. She was so dedicated to upholding the gender role of caring for, and I'm not saying affection isn't there, but she ignored the signs in her own body. And it wasn't she didn't die from loneliness, she died from cancer. She died from things that should have been noticed and taken care of, heart disease. And so that's how I see it is not a new phenomenon. It is truly what we've been living with for a while. And now we have the layer of how government is going to impact those decisions and access that makes it even more detrimental.
I think there is a legislative assault on women's autonomy. I think there is a historic and systemic assault on women's bodies. I think that when we're talking about health for this question, it's not just physical health, it's holistic health, as Margot said, right? It's systemic causes and these intersections, and it's about women's overall well-being. So my response in terms of the greatest challenge, I just think that COVID has created a shadow pandemic for women. So whether you're talking about violence against women, about health systems being broken down, about women's well-being in terms of how much women are having to do to take care in child caring. And like Margot said, that women just aren't taking care of themselves. And as we're talking, I also just want to note that gender and sex are not a binary. So I know during the conversation, we're kind of talking about women and men, and there are not just two sexes and there isn't a binary, but I just want to acknowledge that we are talking as if there were. So, so for me, what's most present is all of these things that, as Margot said, have always been, but they're magnified and really exposed, I think, because of COVID.
I'm going to kind of echo Margot in that access was the first word that popped in my mind when you asked this question, that it's access to information, to even just to make informed decisions that are based in fact, access to opportunity, access to care, time. And when I say care, I mean like the healthcare providers that are going to see you as a whole person, treat you fairly. access to the resources that you need, the skills that you need to thrive. I think there's just so many things that we have gaps in that are, again, to Adrian's point, structural and systematic gaps. So while we can fill the bridge the gaps for individuals at an individual level, I love that. We need to do that. We also have some much bigger change that needs to happen, and looking at where, like, if we can get a bus token for somebody, that is great. Looking at why we have this transportation issue or what a bigger reform could look like for that, even better.
I think intersecting identities obviously play a big part in women's health. And again, going back to what everyone said, issue of access is important. I also think that, as Adrian said, the pandemic plays a big part in that. Again, all of these things, like people have said, have always been here, but they're being magnified because of this pandemic. When you look at studies being done and how women have been disproportionately affected during the pandemic, again, that's not to say that men, children, the elderly, other identities have not been affected. But when we already have patriarchy within our society, when we already have gender inequality and gender inequity in our society, certainly is going to be heightened when we're in the middle of a pandemic. That's just something that's going to happen. And so I think that instead of people trying to throw some backlash at, well, women are just complaining, or women are feeling entitled. No, women are trying to find their spot in society. They're trying to find their space in society. And if they're always being told no, if they're always being disproportionately affected because of the pandemic in terms of their own health care, there's an issue. I also teach classes on human trafficking, and there has been some research about the impact that the pandemic has had on issues of human trafficking. When we're talking about sexual violence, when we're talking about those exploitation of vulnerabilities, we all have been vulnerable during this pandemic, whether it be health, economic vulnerabilities, what have you. And so when you think about within human trafficking, especially sex trafficking is what I talk about mostly, is the exploitation of vulnerabilities. There's certainly going to be an increase in that. But we need to think about how women's health is institutionalized within our society, what funding is given towards women's health, and how we treat women who have specific health issues that may not look like the binary or may not look like people that look like us, right? We all have intersecting identities, and women's health is an umbrella term, and it should give access to people who identify as women to get quality medical care. So
Great. Thank you guys so much again for some really insightful answers to that question. I'd like to move on to the next one if we could. Something I think a lot of people in this panel might be able to speak to. Have you noticed any trends in violence and sexual misconduct over the last few years on and off campus, so in a college or university setting?
I would say the attention that sexual misconduct and sexual assault has been given has increased as a component of campus life and what it means to be safe and welcoming, what it means to be a campus citizen. Is much more of a broader conversation happening that excludes the normalization of sexual misconduct, Title IX violations, rape and sexual assault, sexual harassment in general. So I think that the spotlight has, from a localized as well as far, from our government seats, as polarized as that question may be, in some folks' minds, is sexual assault real? It still is getting the attention. The trend that bothers me, other than the overall issue being appalling and abhorrent that we're dealing with this, and I don't think it's changing, is how men responsibility and their energies toward fixing the problem still not being called out as it dramatically should be. We're still focusing on how do we prevent a lot of action from a victim space. How do you keep yourself safe? All of those things. So I'm concerned about that. And I'm also concerned about, from, I think, a national level, but especially from an Iowa State view, that I believe there's underreporting for marginalized identities. So the sexual assault that's occurring on campuses we only know when we have availability access to the information. And while the processing that might change, what hasn't changed for me across 23 years of practice is that the marginalized population hasn't taken forward, for whatever reason, sense of safety, some normalization of how abuse kind of happens, whether it is this compounding factor that I don't have time for this because I'm struggling just in my identity to survive. I'm not quite sure what the dynamics are, but there is underreporting. And I know that's not a correlation between not having those experiences, and just how that kind of shifts the conversation to for the majority, a white female perspective, right? And that's not the full picture. So that is concerning to me.
I totally agree with Margot. So I don't think that I can't really identify any trends. It's more like there's some progress or some voices. So think about Me Too, which really is a white, cis, straight women's movement, ultimately. So marginalized folks remain pushed to the margins in terms of voice and power. So some people's voices are being heightened. Other voices continue to not be. And at the same time, I think that this goes to Margot's point, that it remains a woman's burden. So the question is kind of about sexual misconduct, sexual assault, sexual harassment. It remains a woman's burden to bring it up, to put up with the trolling, to put up with the resistance, to put up with the narratives, to take care of themselves, right? So it's this weird dichotomy of there's kind of movement, but there's more weight almost on survivors of violence, but the most weight is on our most marginalized and most vulnerable populations as well. So it's a bind. Like, we're talking about it more, but we're not hearing all the voices. And there are these social pressures and forces that are even weightier against our most vulnerable populations. That, I think, is getting worse over time. And it's magnified by the extent to which the most privileged voices are kind of running the narrative, if that makes sense.
And not only running the narrative, like co-opting the narrative, right? The Me Too being a perfect example of that, and making it benefit more of the dominant and identities of power, right? So I could just echo you both a lot. And I'd also bring in the prevention scope of what we're seeing in trends with prevention. Green Dot works very specifically with bystanders to try and empower them to step in and do something that actually feels accessible to them in a moment where they see potential harm. The trend we see more right now in like the kind of culture on campus is that there isn't a lot of confidence on the side of the bystander to step in to do something, because there's either a gap in knowing what to do or knowing how to do it, or overcoming their own personal barriers, which is something everyone on this panel works to educate on. And something that we just need to keep shifting as a culture on campus, that it's okay to step in, people want you to step in, you'd want a friend to step in if they saw something happening. So shifting that expectation will be a really positive trend, I think, in the future that right now we've got some lacking in.
I think that, with the Me Too movement and some other political issues, that women are talking more, but if certain women are not feeling supported in society, then their experiences are not heard, like all of you have talked about previously. I think that we still live in a victim blaming society, that it doesn't matter who it is. If it's women coming out against former President Trump, women coming out against Governor Cuomo, women coming out against a specific football player or what have you, women are still being seen as the agitators. They're still being seen as, well, why didn't you report this? Or you're just in it for the money. But again, we're not having that conversation with men. Why did you do what you do? Why did you do, what makes you think that what you did was okay? We're so quick to blame the victim and show them in a negative light, that the boys will be boys mentality that is still present in our society just runs rampant. And you saw that with former President Trump. You're seeing a little bit with Governor Cuomo, but a lot of politics are behind. I feel like a lot of politics are behind his stepping down, because people are using what happened to him along with how they disagree with how he handled that pandemic, and it's coming from both sides. Again, I'm not saying that what he did was right. It's not. But I think that too many times politics plays a big part in who we hold accountable, and sort of this hierarchy of accountability, that if you already have privilege, you're not going to be held accountable. If you have some other identities that may not give you privilege or show you privilege, you're more apt to be held accountable. And then we see that within the criminal justice system, right? Where our criminal justice system is still very racialized. And so if you have someone that identifies as white and someone identifies as another race, that looks different in how they're held accountable in the legal system. And so, I think that accountability plays a huge part, and intersecting identities play a huge part in the levels of accountability that we have in our society.
And Melissa, if I can add on to that. So one of the things that I didn't say is just, we continue to talk about dominance and power being, and this masculine view of that. And so one of the things we can't discount is the power of the dollar and how that is impacting how our students come to campus, how children have access to producing images and being and the fortification of sex trade in media, social media, TikTok, all of these early things around how are mobile phones used to exploit, right? And so we can't limit sexual assault to just the physicalness of it. It's also the preparation of acceptance, of normalizing it, and helping to promote inch by inch more exposure and more incentive to be victimized without even folks knowing it. So your kindergartner you have to have a serious conversation with your kindergartner, regardless of gender, explicitly about those things that keep them safe and behaviors that you do and do not tolerate, right? That you would not have had to have, right? We would have just did safe, this is safe touch, right? This is bad touch, good touch. That's the conversation we would have had with our kindergartner. Now that has to be much more explicit, because all the imagery in media, and that's about money. We cannot forget it's about money, and how that is exploding even more. So certainly I think that trend has to be noticed.
Great, thank you all. That was a really insightful conversation around, I think, trends in violence and sexual misconduct on campus. And actually that creates a nice segue into the next topic that I kind of want to touch on. So one of the questions we wanted to ask is, what do you think the relationship between power and abusers is when it comes to sexual assault? And do you think precautions are made worldwide to punish those perpetrators and abusers?
This is classic, right? So in every way that people are abusive or oppressive, not limited just to sexual assault, it's about power and dominance. Power over, and for whatever rooted means that is, whether that is about lack of self-confidence, whether that is about, imprisonment, for labor, whether no matter what, just if it's about imposing power in those terms means that you're abusing someone or something, if you're imposing anything. So I think that's just classically associated. When we talk about perpetrators accountability, in that I think, Alyssa makes a good point. It depends on who you are, right? It depends on who you are, where you sit, where you have access to certain defenses. And I think that overarchingly, we can say that the responsibility and that perpetrators should have, their atonement, accountability has always been and is still grossly lacking. And specifically, even if someone is giving a severe accountability measure, right? Whatever that punishment is, it still is not equitable to the amount of trauma and pain that the victim has to deal with on his or her own throughout their lifetime, and how that one instance can impact every aspect of their life moving forward. So it's never going to be equitable. That's my opinion. It's never going to be equitable.
So anytime we're talking about sexual assault specifically, sexual violence specifically, that's all about power. So I think we have to embed, I think we can't talk about sexual violence outside of talking about systems. So as Margot said, oppression and hegemony and misogyny and patriarchy are systems of interrelated forces and barriers and shared understandings that create the context that promotes sexual violence against women and against vulnerable folks, right? So for me, I think we can talk about sexual violence, but it's more important, I think, to talk about the systems that promote that sexual violence to happen, to reinforce it and reinforce all those stereotypes and these conditions that enable the power dynamics that foster the violence.
And I guess while we talk about the bigger picture and the systems that are there, this might feel rudimentary, but the reminder that this power and control can look smaller too, smaller. It's these pieces of gaslighting, of manipulation, of emotional abuse, of isolation, of threats, coercion, everything. If you look at the power and control wheel, like a really good example of that, right? That it's these things that might feel day to day or small or insignificant that aren't, and stack on top of each other that create this culture and power in either a relationship, in a society, whatever it may look like, that we need to pay attention to the small pieces that lead all the way up to this big point that Dr. Lyles was highlighting.
Again, agreeing with what all of the wonderful panelists have said so far, and going back to the intersecting identities of people that are trying to navigate through these systems, right? When we think about students that are trying to navigate through the system of, privilege, when they're trying to figure out if they want to report that they're being assaulted, who do they report it to? How do they report it? Do they think they're going to get in trouble if they report because of other variables within the situation? Do they feel they're going to be believed? I think that plays a part in accountability, but also in a sense of privilege. And I think that too many times we don't think about these systems, that it's very overwhelming to think about. And when we think about sexual violence, it's wrong, it shouldn't happen. But most of us think that, but we don't think about how the systems impact that, and our knowledge of sexual violence and intersecting identities, how me as a cisgender heterosexual white woman, if I've ever been assaulted, how that would impact me versus someone who doesn't identify in the binary or doesn't identify in a sense of privilege, who has disenfranchised identities. Do they even feel like they can report? And so I think these systems, there are these variables that we need to look at and we need to deconstruct and we need to take care of. But we also need to look at these institutions and how they are playing a part in how victims and survivors are treated when we're talking about issues of sexual violence, human trafficking, sexual harassment, stalking, and all of these things. And the messages are not the same. When we still come from a victim blaming message, that if anyone comes out against someone who has a sense of privilege, it's very rare that they're believed, right? That they must have some hidden agenda. And also going back to how, we see it. I teach a class about gender and sexuality in American pop culture. And I talk with my students about how we're so deadened when we see these media images of sexual violence, sexual assault, harassment, how ads are geared towards certain issues, right? And we just go by them like it's nothing, because as a society, we're so deadened to see these issues of violence within our society that when they actually may happen to us or someone that we don't know how to deal with it. Or if it's happening to someone that we may not like or care for, then we automatically victim blame them. So I think we need to not only deal with victim blaming attitudes within our society, but these different systems, as Adrian and all of the panelists talked about, patriarchy, misogyny, hegemony, heterosexism, all of these different things as well. And how do we do that at the same time? Thank you.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Again, really insightful, honest answers. I think we're getting a lot out of this discussion. I did want to just mention, I'm going to ask another question, but if you are an attendee and you have a question that you'd like me to ask the panelists, you can put it into the Q&A and I'll leave time at the end to ask those questions to our panelists. So you can drop those in the Q&A and I will go through them at the end. For this next question, if we can just keep in mind that we'd like to leave time at the end. So just really quickly for this next question, I think we'd like to talk about, so how do you think intersectional identities and marginalized groups experience violence on campus and around the world?
I think they experience it the same, right? Horrific. I think they experience it the same. We're talking about what is the rate? How often are they experiencing it? And how it's impacting them? How do they see the availability, the access, the safety of reporting that? How do they see themselves with incremental trauma have happened throughout their life? How that makes self-efficacy around being able to take control and command respect, how that diminishes it. And so I think with all of those, that baggage and burden in a very crucial time, it can be the one thing that it destroys their ability to move forward, right? It can be just that one more issue that can halt them. And I think there's a myth around this resilience that, have to go through all of this social trash makes you more resilient and able to withstand these sorts of acts of violence and trauma, whether they're large or small. I think that's not true. I think when we talk about why aren't we retaining folk, right? Why don't people get into the system of higher education? It's because they've experienced this trauma earlier and in most dramatic ways, and in layering impacts that they're not even getting to the starting line. And once there, along with all of the trauma, these things occur and there is no stamina to stay, right? And there's no accounting for that. So it is, I think, in a marginalized body, it is always going to be dramatic, but I think it's just an additive layer. Someone who may come in a more privileged body into campus and get and have sexual assault, they're going to be impacted horribly as well. But is a chance that might be the very first time that they have encountered such an act of violence or just that sort of oppression in their mind. It is the standout piece versus it being one of many, right? And so I think that can be accounted for, how that may be a more explicit experience.
The experience of violence is universally bad. And part of the problem is there's this stereotype, for instance, that Black women are strong. So somehow they're resilient and can power through, just that the experience of violence on them somehow wouldn't be as bad as somebody else. So I think that there can be like these underlying stereotypes that we need to be careful of. Violence is violence is violence, and it's universally awful. So the difference isn't like the experience of the violence, but how early and often the violence happens. And it's not just a numbers game, like something bad happened to me 5 times. It's cumulative and is happening against these systems that we've been talking about as well, right? So I don't know what else to say about that. Go ahead, Margot.
And I would say it is also the assumptions about sexuality for people in marginalized identities, right? So the fact that if you are from a gay community, that you must be overly sexualized. If you're a Black female, you are overly sexualized. All these, the vivacious Latina, all of these sort of exotic and erroneous identities around sex itself, and your culpability to be engaged in those kind of behaviors impact that as well. Whether it's in the mindset of the perpetrator or you as a representative of that identity in the space and how you feel safe or actually are protected, I think you can't ignore that.
And then some populations are especially targeted. So when we talk about trans folks, in terms of proportion, 2021 is on pace to be the most violent year in history for trans folks. So, right, yeah.
Yes, yep. And I think we also see a lot of who has access to recovery and who has access to services and who has access to reporting or the knowledge on how to report. I could go off on a really long tangent on it. I won't for the sake of time, but knowing like even the after, we know that's higher rates, but we have higher barriers there too.
Oh, I agree. Anything that I want to say new? Gosh, I think, going back to the intersecting identities, that students on this campus who are sexually assaulted or harassed or stalked come with a variety of life experiences and may not feel that they will be treated equally or they will be treated with respect because of their intersecting identities, whether it be coming to campus and something happening to them or happening within another space, right? And so being able to have conversations with disenfranchised groups that we realize that there may be a negative relationship with law enforcement. And so how will that impact if you report, when you report, how you report? And again, thinking about these other variables that play a part in how students, staff, faculty that have intersecting identities, how that may impact if they report, how they report, and when they report, whether it be distrust with law enforcement, whether it be distrust with the administration, whether it be distrust with how some of their identities may be viewed in society, how they even will be, if they will even be believed. And so I think being able to have conversations around intersecting identities and how those play a part in how people understand and view sexual violence and harassment and stalking, I think is a conversation we need to have. But a lot of people don't know how to have those conversations or are having those conversations with the same people over and over and over again, that we're not reaching our intended audience, which are vulnerable populations. Like I've been in so many meetings and so many task forces that, yes, those are extremely important. But as we all know, it's like preaching to the choir. So how do we take what our message wants to be out of those meetings and impact those communities that we're trying to help? So thank you.
Great, thank you guys so much. I think that conversation, oh, Margot, did you have something else to add?
I was just going to try to address Anna's question in the chat. So Anna asked a question around Dr. Lyles talking about intersectionality and how it plays a role in how women are treated and in the workplace. And could we kind of talk more about this subject? And so I feel kind of compelled. Intersectionality specifically was a Black feminist term. That's how it started. It's kind of got co-opted and moved around. We just talked about Me Too, right? And so how that kind of gets used, for more dominant identities. But the idea is that whole person presentation. But when we look at how folks of color, especially Black women at that conversation, enter a space, you've got the oppressive pieces that come with being Black first in the space, right? And all those histories that come. And then this intersection actually happens when the other identities, I am not just Black, I'm Black and I'm a woman. I'm Black, I'm a woman and I'm poor. I'm Black and I'm a woman and I'm not seen as being educated. I'm Black, I'm a woman and I'm, I may be trans, or I may be gay. I may have all these other Muslim. I have all these other identities that causes me to be even more identified as someone who could be oppressed. So let's take that and move it to sexual violence. So if that is the way, or that's the experience that you go through life into a space, and this is the way folks see you and decide how they have to respect you or treat you, what value you have, then you become more and more expendable. And there is less of a ethical or a moral value given to you, even in the contemplation of whether or not you should be the victim of sexual assault. So I then don't even come in with a fighting chance because someone already says, it's just a Black girl. It's just, right? And so then the piece of you that of right and good doesn't even come up against that, because you already have devalued that person specifically. And so it's just like Adrian was talking about, the amount of violence around trans women is even compounded when you talk about trans women of color, right? That in itself is something to be inspected. What is that about? And it is about race, and it is about the sexuality and orientations and identities as well. So, and it's becoming worse and worse is not a word, is it? It's growing in horrific compounding incidents. And this has been for years now, right? And so that's why we would say it is, for me, when we talk about your vulnerability or this for victimization, it grows as you look at all the identities you hold moving across that spectrum. Hopefully that's adequate of an explanation.
Great. Thank you so much, Margot. I think that was a really insightful response to the question that was asked in the chat. And just really quickly, in acknowledgement of why we're all here, the campus that we're all on, I would really love if we could go through and just talk about what resources are on campus to help women in the areas of women's health, sexual violence, sexual assault, those kinds of things. I think that would be really valuable for those of us viewing the panel.
I'm going to allow Adrian to lead from the equal opportunity section. Take it over.
Thanks, Margot. So access. I'm going to put access as information in the chat. So give me a second when I'm done talking. So it's a community organization that provides services to survivors of violence, and it's comprehensive services. They're amazing. So for me, I think that's the best resource if we're talking about sexual violence. If folks are concerned about being sexually harassed on campus, our office, Margot and my office of Equal Opportunity is the space to address that. So we're always happy to provide consultation and assist in that regard. Emily's going to talk about Green Dot. And there's always, right, campus and community resources in terms of the health center, the hospital, counseling services, legal services, as well. So Sophie, we can find a way I can put together some stuff and maybe we can follow up. It'll take me a minute to gather some resources and I'll put some stuff in the chat as well.
That'd be great.
That's helpful. Okay.
And then I'm on the prevention side. So that was a really great highlight of the response. Access is incredible. And then from prevention, we do work with bystander intervention, right? With Green Dot, I've highlighted that several times. It's like it's my job. And we focus on making sure bystanders have information that they need to be able to actually step in regardless of what their barriers are. We do overviews for groups and classes, offices, literally any group of humans that would like to hear about Green Dot, we will roll up and talk to you about it. So you can go to, just if you Google Green Dot Iowa State, you're going to be able to find us and learn more about us. But this is our prevention programming, again, very specifically geared toward bystander intervention.
And I didn't want to leave out that victims of sexual assault or harassment or any of those areas which we kind of lump into sexual misconduct also in their experience as a student can reach out to the Dean of Students Office, student assistants to, get almost, I would consider it to be almost a navigator sort of system to help with the multifacets you may not think about specifically to engaging as a student in your academic pursuits, as well as, of course, ISUPD, making sure that you understand what that looks like. So we're here. We hope you never need us. We hope you never need us.
And I'll talk about it from an educational perspective really quickly, just because of time, is that I do a lot of human trafficking advocacy on campus, and there is a student organization called Isu Network Against Human Trafficking. I also teach classes on human trafficking. So if you're interested in learning more about the exploitation of vulnerabilities from that perspective, those are options. There are other faculty on campus that are doing some great work around these issues of diversity and inclusion in terms of violence, harassment, things like that, and how we can have those conversations. And also one last place that I wanted to mention was the SLAS Center and the great work that they do with offering space for people to ask about these issues, but also find space to talk about their experiences. So all of the services that we've all talked about, Green Dot especially, is wonderful. Equal Opportunity is wonderful, but I also wanted to mention that those educational resources and also the Margaret SLAS Center for Gender Equity. Thank you.
And the center, LGBTQIA Center as well.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I think that was really insightful for students watching, to be able to know where their resources lay and where they can go if they do experience any of the issues we've mentioned today. I did want to just mention we are out of time, and thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts and your insights and your expertise. We really, really appreciate it. And I also did want to plug that our Senior Director of Communications, Anna Olson, she worked really hard on Women's Week, and we've got a lot of great panels coming up besides this one. So she did put the link in the chat for anybody that's attending, or obviously here as a panelist to be able to view those as well. So thank you guys so much for your time. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you
so much.
Bye-bye.